All guests on ZASLOW Show 2.0 brought to us by the official beer program. You know, we're talking Johnny, Cuba, European roots with that Caribbean soul, a refreshing German lager in a can. Go to johnnycuba.us. Use the Johnny locator. You can find the nearest location to you. You pick up yourself a six-pack. You enjoy the start of Week 11, Thursday Night Football tonight. Make sure you always drink responsibly. And don't forget Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. Our pal is CBS Sports Fantasy Football expert Jamey Eisenberg. He joins us every Thursday, gives us the fantasy football tips. We are in crunch time, of course, when it comes to fantasy football. Jamey, how are you this morning? Good to see you.
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm good. Let's get some thoughts, though, first on the Dolphins, all right? You're from down here. You're a Dolphin fan. Monday Night Football. It was not a great game, but to me, it was the kind of game where if the Dolphins were in the playoff race, and I know, people are going to try and fake it. They're in the mix, But if the Dolphins were having a good season, I feel like that was the type of win we would feel great about because you didn't have to win with the big offense and the defense didn't give up a single touchdown.
It's one of those games that's better in reality than fantasy. Yes, you had a W, and that's what, I think anybody who is a Dolphins fan, I'm not a Dolphins fan, but I did grow up one as a kid, but just want to clarify.
Do you say that because you got to be impartial now? Is that why you say that?
No, I've been impartial for many years. When I covered the team for the Palm Beach Post, or even before that, I guess the Boca News, you have to be unbiased as a professional journalist, and I've never gotten my fandom back to root for the team the same way, But I like to see him do well, obviously for my friends. But in any event, I think for what you're talking about, you're 100% right. If you were just trying to stack W's, that's the type of game you want to see because you didn't give up a lot of. You didn't give up touchdowns. You held your own. You created some turnovers, or at least forced opportunities for turnovers. Stafford, getting back to 2 fumbles, but the defense played as well as it has in a while. And look, they played well against Buffalo too. I guess you got to give them credit, given all the injuries. But offensively, they're just not looking like what you thought this team was going to look like. It's not a lot of big plays. I don't know how much the wrist injury is impacting Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle's certainly not been a factor to what I think many fantasy managers certainly have hoped. And this was the first game really with Tua on the field that Devon Achane did not have a big, statistical game at least, So it's going to be interesting to see them come back home after 2 games on the road and facing a Raiders defense that is not great, but is fresh and, coming off a bye. So it'll be an interesting matchup. I hope the offense shows up and puts up big points.
Who do you think has hurt fantasy football owners more this year, Patrick Mahomes or Tyreek Hill?
I mean, it's got to be Tyreek Hill based on expectations and draft cost. You can pivot to find another quarterback. You can't pivot to find another Tyreek Hill in fantasy. So, for a guy who was, in no matter where you looked, he was a top 3 wide receiver. So first it's Tua's concussion, now it's the wrist injury, and just the lackluster performance overall. And when he's on the field, you got to expect him to produce at a higher level, and you got saved with the touchdown. So hopefully we start to see the best of Tyreek Hill. You also have to worry at some point, if they continue to fall out of playoff contention, because they are still in it. But if they fall out of playoff contention, do they shut him down, to make sure that a 30-year-old wide receiver is ready to go next year, since he is a big part of what their future is.
Let's take a look at tonight. We got a great Thursday night game again. I mean, last week we had a great Thursday night game, Bengals and Ravens. Now tonight, big-time NFC East matchup, Commanders, Eagles. What do we like here this evening?
I mean, like a lot, really the 2 spots you look at and say, okay, can I trust these players is the Washington backfield and the Eagles second receiver and tight end in Devontae Smith and Dallas Goedert. I'll start there. Typically what we've seen for Devontae Smith is when everybody's healthy, his numbers just don't spike to the same level that they do when someone's missing, which makes sense. He's certainly a big piece of the offense, but he does much better when Goedert or Brown or both, as we've seen at some points this season, are missing. So he's still a number 2/3 receiver, depending on what your team looks like. I just don't expect him to see the type of targets that we're used to seeing for Devontae Smith. So not a top 15 wide receiver, which he's been at many times this year. Goddard is a low-end starting tight end. He's going to probably need to score to help save your fantasy night. And then for Washington's backfield, Brian Robinson's expected to play. So that, makes it a little bit tricky because Austin Eckler has been really good the last 2 weeks with Robinson out. I think both guys are flex options because this Eagles defense has been fantastic since their bye week. Dolphins fans will still remember Vic Fangio's name, former defense coordinator down here. His system is finally working in Philadelphia. It took a few weeks, but they are just locking people down. They haven't faced a lot of great offenses. This is one of the better ones that they've seen since their bye week. The other one that was decent was Cincinnati. But you're starting Jaden Daniels, you're starting Terry McLaurin, you're starting A.J. Brown, you're starting Jalen Hurts and Saquon Barkley. It should be a big game for Barkley. The Washington run defense has been a little tough to trust.
Where is Jalen Hurts ranked among quarterbacks this season?
He's definitely in the top 3. His last stretch of games, he's out rushing teams, not just players, teams. He's back to scoring rushing touchdowns. It's funny around their bye week, when they had a couple of, disappointing performances and losses, it was, he's not on the same page with Nick Sirianni. This is never going to work. He misses Shane Steichen. It's just a disaster. And he's just sort of, calmed and, gone about his business. And the tush push is back. The rushing production's back. He really just needs A.J. Brown on the field. Whenever A.J. Brown's on the field, he's just been absolutely a stud. And so I think he may have moved into the number 1 spot. No, I'm sorry, number 2 spot. Lamar Jackson, number 1. So he's probably in top 5 for sure. He might be number 2. I don't usually look at like season-long rankings, but he's up there.
All right, let's look at the Dolphins here. Dolphins, they have the Raiders. They are back home this Sunday, 1 p.m. What do you got?
You're, Devon Achane's a top 5 running back. Again, last week was disappointing, but you still got 5 catches. He's just been such a factor in the passing game. It's hard to overlook. So he'll do a better job. The thing I want to see with the backfield is, does Jalen Wright continue to move ahead of Raheem Mostert? Mostert
had no carries last week.
Used in the passing game, had a couple catches. So we'll see what's going on there, because really the thing you want to know as a fantasy manager, I don't think a lot of people were starting Raheem Mostert. They were rostering him. Is what happens if Devon Achane has to miss any time? So does Mostert go back to being the featured guy if Achane's not there, or is it Jalen Wright? And that's a story I don't think we have an answer to. You're starting Tyreek Hill, and you got to sit Jalen Waddle. He's gone 9 points or less in PPR, which is hard to do, in every game but week 1. So the 2 games that he missed, you could say, not on the same page with the backup quarterbacks. 3 games now with Tua back, and it's still not clicking right now. So until
he started the game, the first 3 plays of the game last week, Waddle had 54 yards receiving. First 3 plays of the game, he finished the game with 55.
It's amazing. I don't understand the lack of attempts to both receivers. Do some bubble screens. It doesn't have to be everything down the field. They're taking everything away. They've been doing it for a year plus now. They're just not letting the Dolphins make plays down the field. So you got to do something different. And this is where Mike McDaniel's got to go into the lab and find some things that work just to get those guys opportunities, because they're such great players. And so it just can't all be dink and dunk with Devon Achane and now Jonnu Smith, and you're sprinkling in a little bit Malik Washington and Odell Beckham. You want to see these star receivers. And I'm not just talking fantasy. I mean, I think it'll help the team. And it helped Tua, so maybe coming back home, changes some things. But until you see Jalen Waddle producing at a high level, you can't start him. Tyreek, you're just going to start, but he's not a top 5 receiver. He's more of a top 15 variety.
Wow.
And the Raiders, Jacoby Myers has been great. Brock Bowers is a stud. I'm curious because they changed offense coordinators, going into their bye week. So Scott Turner is now calling plays for them. Will they change and go back to Zamir White? Because we know that you can run on the Dolphins, and he's a more physical presence. So if he's on your waiver wire, not a bad guy to pick up and stash.
Huge game on Sunday as well. Ravens at Steelers. What do you got there?
So if the rivalry holds, it's going to be a field goal fest and a low-scoring affair. If the matchups hold, you're not stopping Lamar Jackson. I mean, he's just been an absolute superstar. So they'll slow him down a little bit, but you're going to expect a big game from him. The receiving core, it's really Zay Flowers as number 2 receiver, but who else can you trust? Rashad Bateman had his first good game since Deontay Johnson joined the team 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago at this point. But you can't trust him. You can't trust Deontay Johnson, even in a revenge game, taking on his former team with the Steelers. For Baltimore, it's Derrick Henry and Lamar Jackson. And Mark Andrews, he looked great last week without Isaiah Likely, so hopefully he's back. For the Steelers, it's Russell Wilson. Based on the matchup, it's one of the best matchups on the season. They're number 2 in most fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. Baltimore is. So he's a low-end starter. George Pickens is a must-start wide receiver. I want to stash Mike Williams. I don't want to start him to have the 1 catch. It was a 32-yard touchdown last week. And then Najee Harris, I think, is just a little tough to trust this week because he'll get work, but this is not the right matchup for him. The Baltimore run defense has held up its own, held its end of the bargain for the most part this season. So number 2 running back at best.
Colts at Jets. Anthony Richardson's back in the starting lineup. So what does that do?
So it's a downgrade for the receivers. I still will start Josh Downs as a borderline number 2, number 3 receiver. He's been a standout number 2 receiver with Joe Flacco. But give him credit. Last time these two guys were on the field together against Houston, he had 109 yards receiving and a touchdown. And 9 targets, which is basically the amount of targets he's been getting. So I think he's still somewhat safe, just not as safe as he was with Flacco. Pittman missed last week, which was a big game for Alec Pierce and Adonai Mitchell. But with Anthony Richardson, you just can't trust those 3 guys because the targets have been too erratic. I think it'll be good for Jonathan Taylor. And this is an interesting game for Anthony Richardson because the Jets have allowed a rushing touchdown to a quarterback in 4 of their last 5 games. Last week, it was Kyler Murray giving up 2 or scoring 2 rushing touchdowns against the Jets. You can run on the Jets from that position. Will he do it? Because he hasn't been doing it to the level that I had hoped. I thought he'd be like a 60, 70-yard rusher almost every other week, and he just wasn't doing that. So I think if they allow him to be a playmaker, remember the quote from Shane Steichen before the game is, you're not going to tell Steph Curry not to shoot threes. You want to see this kid run, and if he does, I think it'll open up the offense a little bit. He's going to put himself at risk, but I think that's what they need for this offense. So he's not worth starting in 1 quarterback leagues, but he's not a bad guy to roster just to see what happens.
And how about the biggest game of the weekend? Chiefs at Bills, non-fantasy wise. Do the Bills knock off the Chiefs for the first time this year? And who do you like in the game?
I think they do. Obviously, Kansas City's been so smart, efficient, lucky, great defense. Run game's been solid. Mahomes has done what he's had to do at times, gone and win games. But, you see what happens last week. The horseshoe is definitely there when they block a field goal. And, I love the strategy of it. We knew where to attack and all that stuff. You got lucky. You blocked the field goal last second, So, but kudos to them. I think this is a game where Buffalo in the regular season, shows what they're capable of, and then they're gonna have to do it in the playoffs because these two teams seem like they're on a collision course with Baltimore factoring in also. But fantasy wise, look, Josh Allen's a must-start quarterback. James Cook, even in a tough matchup, you're still starting him, but just downgrade expectations. The receivers, we just don't know who's playing yet. Keon Coleman's out, but is Amari Cooper going to play? I don't love Cooper if he does play. I still like Khalil Shakir as a borderline starter if he's out. And the tight end position is interesting for Buffalo because Dalton Kincaid is banged up right now. Dawson Knox could be a good fill-in option because of Coleman's injury, Cooper's injury. They're just really beat up at the receiver spot. Dawson Knox is facing the Chiefs. They're the number 2 team in most fantasy points to opposing tight ends. Kareem Hunt's a must-start running back. Travis Kelce must-start tight end. And Mahomes has just kind of been what he is. He's going to be a low-end starter at best. This is not a good matchup for him. So if you can sit him, I'd sit him.
Amazing. Excellent job as always, Jamey. Tell everybody how they can hear you leading up to tonight's game and throughout the weekend.
I'm going to jump off your show and I'm going to go do our podcast, which you can find on YouTube and wherever podcasts are found. It's called Fantasy Football Today. Check us out, CBS Sports HQ. It's our 24-hour streaming network. And then you can always follow me on Twitter and certainly CBSSports.com. It's at Jamey Eisenberg.
Thank you, Jamey. Excellent job. Enjoy the games this weekend.
You as well. Safe travels, bud.